The second day of the second lunar month, the dragon raises its head. In the tranquil town of Niping Alley during the late afternoon, a lone, slender young man followed an age-old tradition. Holding a candle in one hand and a peach branch in the other, he illuminated the beams, walls, wooden bed, and various corners of the room. He tapped the surfaces lightly with the branch, hoping to drive away snakes, centipedes, and other pests. As he did so, he murmured the saying passed down through generations in this small town. On the second day of the second lunar month, light up the beams, strike the walls with peach branches, so that earthly serpents and insects have nowhere to hide. The young man's surname was Tran, given name Benin. His parents had passed away early. This small town was renowned for its porcelain, and ever since the founding of the current dynasty, it had been responsible for producing sacrificial ceramics for the imperial tombs. Every year, government officials were stationed here to oversee the imperial kilns. Orphaned and alone, Benin became a kiln worker at a young age. He started with menial tasks, apprenticed under a harsh and ill-tempered master, and struggled through years of hardship. Just as he had begun grasping the intricacies of the trade, fate took an unexpected turn. The town suddenly lost its status as an imperial kiln supplier. In a single night, the government ordered the shutdown of the dozens of dragon-shaped kilns that had sustained the town for generations. Tran Benin set down the freshly cut peach branch, blew out the candle, and stepped outside. Sitting on the doorstep, he tilted his head up to gaze at the brilliant night sky. He still vividly remembered the old master, the only one who had ever acknowledged him as a half-disciple. His surname was Diu. One early autumn morning last year, he had been found sitting motionless on a bamboo chair, facing the kiln, eyes closed. But few were as devoted as old Diu. For generations, the craftsmen of this town had known only one thing: firing porcelain. They dared not overstep by creating anything beyond the government's commissioned wares, nor could they sell stored porcelain to common folk. With no other options, they sought different livelihoods. At 14, Tran Benin, too, was cast out of his old home. He returned to Niping Alley to guard the dilapidated family house, a near-empty structure that barely held together. Even if he wished to be a prodigal son, there was nothing left to squander. For a time, he drifted like a wandering ghost, searching desperately for a way to make a living. He scraped by on the last of his savings, barely managing to feed himself. A few days prior, he had heard about an old blacksmith named Nguyen, who had come to a distant alley in town and announced he was taking in 7 or 8 apprentices. There was no pay, but meals were provided. Seizing the opportunity, Benin hurried over, only to be rejected at a glance by the old man. He was baffled. Was blacksmithing not about strength? Did it require good looks instead? Though he appeared thin, Benin possessed considerable strength, honed through years of dragging heavy clay for the kilns. Moreover, he had followed old Diu across mountains and rivers within a 100-mile radius of the town, learning about the different soil compositions. He was hardworking and willing to take on the dirtiest, heaviest tasks without complaint. Unfortunately, old Diu had never favored him, calling him dull-witted and slow to learn, far inferior to his senior apprentice, Lu Tianjun. It was not favoritism, rather, skill depended on personal talent. While Benin had struggled for 3 years, Lu Tianjun had mastered the same techniques in just 6 months. Even if he might never need this craft again, Benin continued practicing as before. Closing his eyes, he pictured the stone platform and potter's wheel in front of him and began miming the motions of shaping clay. Every 15 minutes, he would pause to shake out his hands, repeating the process until exhaustion took over. When he could no longer move, he stood up, strolling around the courtyard to stretch his limbs. No one had ever taught him this method, he had figured it out himself. In the stillness of the night, a sharp, mocking laugh rang out. Benin stopped walking. Sure enough, he spotted a boy of the same age crouching atop the courtyard wall, smirking with undisguised disdain. This boy was his longtime neighbor, rumored to be the illegitimate son of a former imperial kiln overseer. The official, fearful of court scrutiny and public scorn, had abandoned his child upon returning to the capital, leaving him under the care of a well-connected successor. Now that the town had lost its imperial kiln privileges, the new overseer was scrambling to secure his own position in the capital. He left behind a sum of money and hurried away, leaving the boy to his own devices. Yet, despite his uncertain status, the boy lived as carefree as ever, accompanied by his personal maidservant. He roamed the town aimlessly, indulging in pleasure, never once worrying about money. The earthen walls of Ni Ping Ali's homes were low. The boy could easily see into Ben An's courtyard without effort, yet he deliberately chose to perch atop the wall whenever they spoke. Unlike Ben An's plain and unrefined name, his neighbor's name was far more elegant, Tong Tap Tan. Even his maid had a poetic name, Tri Q. The young maid stood behind the courtyard wall, her almond-shaped eyes filled with timid unease. Just then, a voice spoke from outside the courtyard. "Is this maid for sale?" Tong Tap Tan froze, turning toward the speaker. It was a well-dressed young man in luxurious garments, standing outside the courtyard with an unfamiliar face. Beside him stood an elderly man, tall and dignified, his pale face exuding an air of benevolence. He narrowed his eyes slightly as he observed the two courtyards and their occupants. His gaze swept past Tran Benin without pause, but when it landed on Tong Tap Tan and the young maid, his smile grew deeper. Tong Tap Tan narrowed his eyes and sneered, "Sell her?" "Of course, I'll sell her." The well-dressed young man chuckled. "Then name your price." The young maid's eyes widened in horror, like a frightened fawn caught in headlights. The sky was still dim, and before the rooster had crowed, Tran Benin had already gotten out of bed. The thin blanket and mattress could hardly retain any warmth. Moreover, during his time as an apprentice at the kiln, he had developed the habit of waking up early and sleeping late. Tran Benin opened the door to his room, stepped into the soft, damp courtyard, took a deep breath, stretched, and then walked out into the street. As he turned back, he noticed a frail figure bending over, carrying a wooden bucket filled with water, using her shoulder to push open the courtyard gate. It was Tong Tap Tan's maid. She had likely just returned from fetching water from the Iron Lock well in Apricot Blossom Alley. Retracting his gaze, Tran Benin ran through the streets and alleys, jogging towards the eastern side of the small town. The Mud Bottle Alley was in the west, while at the easternmost city gate, there were officials responsible for monitoring the entry and exit of merchants and enforcing the town's nightly curfew. They also handled the collection and distribution of letters sent from outside the town. Tran Benin's task that day was to deliver those letters to the townspeople. The payment for this job was 1 copper coin per letter, an opportunity he had worked hard to obtain. He had made an agreement with the officials to take on this task after the Dragon Raises Its Head festival in the second lunar month. According to Tong Tap Tan, Tran Benin was born into a life of hardship. Even if fortune favored him, he could never truly escape his fate. Tong Tap Tan often spoke in riddles, quoting from old books that Tran Benin could barely understand. For example, just a few days ago, she kept mentioning something about the cold of early spring and the deadly chill of winter taking young lives. Tran Benin had no idea what she meant. However, he did understand that the transition from winter to spring often brought a cold spell, which he had experienced firsthand. She had called it the March chill, comparing it to a warrior's returning spear on the battlefield, a deadly strike that many would not survive. The small town had no enclosing walls, as there were hardly any bandits or thieves, let alone large-scale invasions. The so-called city gate was nothing more than a series of rickety wooden fences, with a single pathway allowing people and carts to pass through, a modest facade for the town. As Tran Benin jogged past Apricot Blossom Alley, he saw many women and children gathered around the Iron Lock well, drawing water while the wooden wheel of the well creaked under constant use. After rounding another street corner, he heard a familiar sound, the rhythmic chanting of students reading aloud. There was a private school nearby, funded by a few wealthy families in town. The teacher was an outsider. When Tran Benin was younger, he would often sneak outside the school window, crouching down to listen in on the lessons. Although the teacher was strict, he never chased away children like Tran Benin, who came to borrow knowledge. However, once Tran Benin started working as an apprentice at Long Kiln outside the town, he no longer had time to visit the school. Continuing forward, he passed by an old stone temple. Since the temple had 12 stone pillars, the locals called it the Crab Temple. However, its official name was a matter of debate. According to Tong Tap Tan, historical records referred to it as the Grand Scholar's Pavilion, a shrine bestowed by the emperor to honor a great official renowned for his contributions to literature and military strategy. In contrast, Lu Tianjung, a fellow country bumpkin like Tran Benin, scoffed at this notion, arguing that the townspeople had called it the Crab Temple for hundreds of years, so there was no reason to change its name. He even challenged Tong Tap Tan with a question: just how big is a Grand Scholar's hat? Is it bigger than the mouth of the Iron Lock Well? A question that left Tong Tap Tan blushing with frustration. At that moment, Tran Benin ran a lap around the 12-pillared temple. Each pillar bore 4 large characters, written in different ancient scripts: act with benevolence, words of truth are natural, do not seek beyond, and Chi reaches the northern dipper. According to Tong Tap Tan, other stone plaques on the temple had been defaced or altered over time. But these mysterious inscriptions meant little to Tran Benin. He never thought too deeply about them. After all, even if he did, it would be futile. He didn't even know what kind of book the so-called local county records that Tong Tap Tan always mentioned was. Not far beyond the temple stood an old Chinese scholar tree with lush green leaves. Beneath it lay a makeshift bench, formed from a fallen tree trunk supported by 2 stone slabs. Every summer, the townspeople would gather here to enjoy the shade. Wealthier families would even bring out baskets of chilled fruits from the well, allowing the children to feast before running off to play under the tree's canopy. Having grown accustomed to climbing mountains and wading through rivers, Tran Benin arrived at the wooden fence near the eastern gate without breaking a sweat. There, he paused before a lone, red earth building. Strangers rarely visited the town, especially now that the imperial kilns had ceased operation. Even during its heyday, the kiln's porcelain was exclusively reserved for the emperor and empress. Ordinary people, no matter how wealthy or powerful, were forbidden from touching it, an offense punishable by death. Old Master Ju had once drunkenly told his apprentices, including Tran Benin and Lu Tianjung, that their craft was unique in the world, serving only the highest authorities. Today, however, standing outside the wooden fence, Tran Benin saw a group of unfamiliar faces, 7 or 8 people, men and women of all ages, all waiting for the gates to open. They were all strangers. The townspeople rarely used the eastern gate, as it led to neither the Long Kiln nor the farmlands. At that moment, Tran Benin and the outsiders stood on opposite sides of the wooden fence, quietly observing each other. For a brief moment, the young boy in his worn-out straw shoes envied their thick, sturdy clothes. They must be warm, he thought. They wouldn't feel the cold. The people outside the gate were divided into small groups. Most of them wore indifferent expressions, though 1 or 2 had already shifted their gaze past the boy, looking toward the depths of the town. Tran Benin found this puzzling. Did they not know that the imperial court had shut down all the kilns? Or had they come precisely because they knew the truth, hoping to take advantage of the situation? Among them, a man wearing an unusually tall hat. The town was neither too big nor too small, with about 600 households. Among the impoverished families in the town, most received aid from Qin Pinyin. As for the wealthy and well-off families with high thresholds, the barefooted boy could not step inside. Some affluent families gathered in a spacious alley that Qin Pinyin had never even set foot in. On that side of the street, large slabs of bluestone paved the ground. Even on rainy days, one could walk without stepping into muddy puddles. These high-quality bluestone slabs, having endured countless footsteps and carriage wheels over the centuries, had long been polished smooth like a mirror. The Lu, Li, Zhao, and Song families were the prominent clans in the town. The kilns that made glazed tiles for official residences were mostly run by these families, and many kiln supervisors lived nearby. Coincidentally, today, Chen Pingyan had 10 letters to deliver, almost all addressed to well-known wealthy families in the town. This made sense, just as dragons give birth to dragons, and phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, those who could afford to send letters home were likely from well-off families. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the confidence to venture far from home. Of these 10 letters, 9 were sent to just 2 places, Fulu Street and Peach Leaf Alley. When he stepped onto the broad, bed-like bluestone slabs for the first time, the young boy felt uneasy and slowed his pace. He couldn't help but feel self-conscious, as if his straw sandals were dirtying the pristine pavement. The first letter he delivered was to the Lu family, whose ancestors had once received an imperial jade rui scepter. Standing at the entrance, the young boy felt even more nervous and uneasy. Wealthy families certainly paid attention to details. The Lu family residence was grand, and even the entrance was flanked by 2 towering stone lions, exuding an imposing aura. Song Jiatan had once said these ornaments warded off evil and brought fortune. Chen Pingyan didn't quite understand what warding off evil meant, but he was fascinated by the stone lions' mouths, which seemed to hold round stone balls inside. How had they been carved like that? Resisting the urge to touch them, he stepped up the stairs and knocked on the brass lion-shaped door knocker. Soon, a young man opened the door. Upon hearing that it was a letter delivery, he expressionlessly pinched a corner of the envelope with 2 fingers, took it inside, and quickly shut the grand door adorned with painted depictions of the god of wealth. The rest of the deliveries were similarly uneventful. At the corner of Peach Leaf Alley, a lesser-known household opened its doors to reveal a kindly old man. After receiving the letter, he smiled and said, "Young lad, you've worked hard. Would you like to come in for a rest and have some warm water?" The boy shyly smiled, shook his head, and quickly ran off. The old man gently placed the letter into his sleeve but did not hurry back inside. Instead, he looked into the distance with his cloudy eyes. His gaze moved from high to low, from far to near, focusing on the peach trees lining the street. It was as if he was a senile old man, only now clearing away a faint smile. Then, he turned around and walked away. Before long, a small, bright yellow bird landed on a peach tree branch, its beak still tender, chirping softly. The last letter Chen Pingyan had to deliver was for the town's academy teacher. On the way, he passed by a fortune-telling stall run by a young Taoist priest clad in an old robe. Sitting upright behind the table, the priest wore a high bun, resembling a blooming lotus flower. Upon seeing the boy hurrying past, the Taoist called out, "Young man, don't just walk by. Come and draw a fortune stick. I can predict your luck, blessings, and misfortunes." Chen Pingyan didn't stop but turned his head and waved his hand in refusal. The priest was persistent, leaning forward and raising his voice, "Young man, I usually charge 10 copper coins for a divination, but today, I'll make an exception, just 3 coins. However, if you draw a good fortune, you can give me an extra coin as a blessing. If you draw the best fortune, I'll still only charge 5 coins. How about that?" Chen Pingyan's steps hesitated for a brief moment. Seeing this, the Taoist quickly stood up and pressed on, "You are my first customer this morning. I'll do a good deed, just sit down and draw a stick. I won't hide anything from you. I will also write a talisman on yellow paper for you, which can bless your ancestors and accumulate good karma. I won't claim to make you a future noble, but at the very least, it will bring you a little extra fortune." Chen Pingyan was stunned, hesitating for a moment before half believing and half doubting. He turned around and sat on the long bench in front of the stall. A rustic Taoist priest and a cold, impoverished young boy, 2 poor souls sat facing each other. The priest smiled and extended his hand, gesturing for the boy to take the bamboo container of fortune sticks. Chen Pingyan hesitated and suddenly said, "I won't draw a stick. Can you just write me the talisman?" In Chen Pingyan's memory, this wandering young Taoist had already stayed in town for at least 5 or 6 years. His appearance hadn't changed much, and he was always kind to everyone. Usually, he read fortunes, examined bones, and wrote letters for people. The interesting thing was that despite the 108 sticks in his bamboo container, over the years, no one had ever drawn the best or the worst fortune. Every single stick was an average fortune. That was why, during festivals, people who wanted a bit of good luck were willing to pay 10 coins for a reading. But those facing real troubles would never come here, as they knew they wouldn't get any miraculous guidance. Still, calling him a fraud would be unfair. The town was small, and if he was truly a scammer, he would have been chased out long ago. His real skill wasn't fortune-telling but rather minor healing abilities. Many people had recovered from minor illnesses after drinking his talisman water. It was quite effective. The young Taoist shook his head, saying, "I act with integrity, I won't deceive the old or the young. The rule is to draw a stick and get a talisman together, all for 5 coins. Chen Pingyan protested in a low voice, "You said 3 coins. The Taoist laughed and said, "If you draw the best fortune, won't it be 5 coins anyway?" Determined, Chen Pingyan reached out for the bamboo container. Suddenly, if he hadn't passed through Fuck Lock Street or the Dao Deep Alley, Tran Benin might never have realized how dark and narrow Na Ben Alley was in his lifetime. However, the straw sandal-wearing boy did not feel any sense of loss. Instead, he finally felt at ease. He smiled and stretched out his hands, just enough for his palms to touch the red earthen wall twice. He remembered that 3 or 4 years ago, he could only reach the wall with the tips of his fingers. When he arrived in front of his house, he found the courtyard door wide open. Thinking that a thief had broken in, the boy quickly rushed into the yard, only to see a tall young man sitting on the doorstep, leaning against the locked room door, yawning out of boredom. When the young man saw Tran Benin, he jumped up as if his pants were on fire, ran up to him, grabbed his arm tightly, and dragged him towards the house while speaking in a hushed voice. "Hurry up and open the door, I have something important to tell you." Tran Benin couldn't break free from this guy's grip and had no choice but to unlock the door. The robust young man, who was 2 years older than him, quickly pushed him aside, tiptoed over to Tran Benin's wooden bed, pressed his ear tightly against the wall, and started eavesdropping on the next-door neighbors. Curious, Tran Benin asked, "Lu Tianjung, what are you doing?" The tall young man ignored his question. About half an incense stick's time later, Lu Tianjung returned to normal and sat down on the edge of the wooden bed. His expression was complicated, partly relieved, partly regretful. It was only then that Lu Tianjung noticed Tran Benin performing a peculiar ritual. He was squatting by the door, leaning his body outward, burning a piece of yellow paper with a candle stub the size of a thumb. The ashes were carefully placed outside the threshold. Tran Benin seemed to be muttering something, but since he was a bit far away, Lu Tianjung couldn't make out the words. Lu Tianjung was the last disciple of Long Juju, the master of a long-established shop. However, as for the slow-witted Tran Benin, the old man had never truly acknowledged him as a disciple. In their hometown, if an apprentice hadn't served tea to his master, or if the master hadn't accepted that tea, then they weren't officially recognized as master and disciple. Tran Benin and Lu Tianjung weren't even neighbors, their ancestral homes were far apart. The reason Lu Tianjung once introduced Tran Benin to Master Ju was due to a past grudge. Lu Tianjung used to be a well-known troublemaker in town. Before his grandfather passed away, his family still had some elders to discipline him. But after his grandfather died of illness, the 12 or 13-year-old boy, who was already as tall and strong as a grown man, became a nightmare for the neighborhood, a true street menace. Later, for some reason, Lu Tianjung provoked a group of Lu family youths. They pinned him down in the Ben Alley and gave him a severe beating. The Lu boys, being young and hot-blooded, didn't hold back, and Lu Tianjung was soon coughing up blood. Most of the households in Naben Alley were low-class laborers who barely made a living, so no one dared to interfere. At that time, Tong Tap Tan, instead of being afraid, squatted on the wall and watched the scene unfold with great amusement. In the end, only one scrawny child, looking like a pile of dry twigs, sneaked out from the back of his yard, ran to the alley entrance, and shouted toward the main street with all his might. "Someone's dead! Someone's dead!" Upon hearing the words, "Someone's dead," the Lu family boys snapped out of their frenzy. Seeing Lu Tianjung lying on the ground, covered in blood and barely breathing, they finally felt a sense of fear. They looked at each other and quickly fled through another exit of Naben Alley. But even after that incident, Lu Tianjung didn't feel grateful to the boy who had saved his life. Instead, he often came over to tease and bully him. However, the orphan was stubborn. No matter how much Lu Tianjung provoked him, he never shed a tear. This only made Lu Tianjung even more frustrated. One year, Lu Tianjung saw that the orphan, Tran Benin, was barely surviving the harsh winter. Finally, his conscience kicked in. At that time, he had already become an apprentice under Master Jiu. He decided to take the orphan to Longjiu, located by the stream outside the town. It was a heavy snow day, and the mountain road stretched for dozens of miles westward. To this day, Lu Tianjung still couldn't figure out how that scrawny boy, whose legs were as thin as bamboo poles, managed to walk all the way to Longjiu. Although the old Master Jiu ultimately allowed Tran Benin to stay, the difference in treatment between the two boys was like night and day. With Lu Tianjung, his official disciple, he was both strict and caring. He would scold and beat him, but even a blind person could tell that the old man was training him with great effort. For example, if he accidentally hit Lu Tianjung too hard and made his forehead bleed, the thick-skinned boy wouldn't mind, but Master Jiu would feel guilty about it. The old man, usually strict and reserved, would pace around his room for half the night, unable to sleep. In the end, he would call Tran Benin over and ask him to deliver a bottle of ointment to Lu Tianjung. For all these years, Tran Benin had always admired Lu Tianjung. But it wasn't because of his talent, strength, or popularity. It was because Lu Tianjung feared nothing in the world. Wherever he went, he was always carefree, never feeling alone. No matter the place or the people around him, he could quickly make friends, drink, fight, and bond with others as if they had been sworn brothers forever. Lu Tianjung had started working early in life due to his grandfather's poor health. He became like the king of the local children, catching snakes, fishing, and raiding birds' nests with expert skill. He could craft wooden bows, fishing rods, and bird cages. He was especially good at catching mudfish and eels in the rice fields near the village. No one in town could match him in these two skills. In fact, when Lu Tianjung was forced to drop out of the local school, the teacher, Mr. Tay, even visited his sick grandfather, offering to let him study for free. But Lu Tianjung refused, saying he just wanted to earn money, not study. Mr. Tay even suggested paying him to be his personal book boy, but Lu Tianjung still wouldn't agree. To be honest, Lu Tianjung lived quite well. Even after Master Jiu passed away and Longjiu was shut down, within just a few days. Tong Tap Tan, accompanied by his maid Tri Q, walked under the old locust tree and found that the shade was crowded with people, leaving no space. Nearly 50 people were sitting on benches they had brought from home, while children pulled their elders along to watch the excitement. Standing side by side under the tree, Tong Tap Tan saw an elderly man beneath the trunk. He held a large white bowl in one hand while resting the other behind his back. His expression was animated as he loudly proclaimed, "I just spoke about the general direction of the dragon vein, and now I'll talk about this true dragon. TSK, this is truly remarkable. Around 3,000 years ago, a legendary immortal emerged in this world. At first, he devoted himself to cultivation in a certain blessed land, attaining the great Tao. Then, he traveled the world alone with his long sword, embodying an unyielding spirit of 3 feet. For some reason, he seemed to have a grudge against flood dragons. Over 300 years, he slew any flood dragon he encountered, until none remained in the world. Only then did he stop. In the end, he disappeared without a trace. Some say he ascended to the highest realm of Taoism to converse with the Tao ancestor, others claim he traveled to the distant western Pure Land to debate scripture with the Buddha. There are even those who say he guards the gates of Fengdu underworld, preventing demons and ghosts from harming the human world. The old man spoke passionately, spittle flying, but the small-town villagers remained indifferent, their faces filled with confusion. The maid whispered curiously, "What is the unyielding spirit of 3 feet?" Tong Tap Tan smiled and said, "It means a sword." The maid huffed, "Master, this old man is overly fond of showing off his knowledge. He doesn't even speak properly." Tong Tap Tan glanced at the old man and, amused by his misfortune, said, "Hardly anyone in our small town is literate. This storyteller might as well be winking at the blind." The maid asked again, "What is a blessed land? Can someone really live for 300 years? And that Fengdu underworld, isn't that a place only the dead can enter?" Tong Tap Tan was momentarily stumped by the questions, but unwilling to admit ignorance, he casually replied, "It's all nonsense. He's probably just read a few low-quality books and is using them to fool the villagers." At that moment, Tong Tap Tan keenly noticed that the old man had glanced at him, just for a fleeting moment, like a dragonfly skimming the water, but he caught it nonetheless. However, he dismissed it as a mere coincidence. The maid looked up at the old locust tree. Sunlight filtered through the gaps between the leaves, casting speckled patterns. She instinctively squinted her eyes. Tong Tap Tan turned to look at her and suddenly froze. At this moment, his maid's face, having just shed its youthful roundness, no longer resembled the skinny, dry little servant girl from his memories. According to the customs of the town, when a woman gets married, she invites a person from a prosperous family to trim the fine hairs on her face, even out her bangs, and neaten her temples, a ritual known as opening the face or shaping the brows. Tong Tap Tan had read about a town with no such custom. So, when Tri Kyo was 12, he had bought the finest newly brewed wine, poured it into a beautifully glazed porcelain bottle that resembled green plums, sealed it carefully with clay, and buried it underground. Suddenly, Tong Tap Tan said, "Tri Kyo, though that Tran family scoundrel, according to the old scholars, is rotten wood that cannot be carved, a crumbling wall that cannot be plastered, no matter what, he has still done one meaningful thing in his life." The maid did not reply, lowering her eyelashes slightly. If one looked closely, they might see them tremble. Tong Tap Tan continued, "Tran Benin, though not a bad person, is too rigid in character. He's stubborn in everything he does. That's why, as a kiln craftsman, no matter how hard he works, he'll never create anything with real spirit. That's why Master Lu Tianjung and that old Jiu craftsman despise him. They have sharp eyes, they saw that he was rotten wood that cannot be carved. As for a crumbling wall that cannot be plastered, it means that no matter what, even if you dress Tran Benin in dragon robes, he will still look like a poor barefoot country bumpkin." At this point, Tong Tap Tan chuckled bitterly, "In truth, I am even worse off than Tran Benin." She did not know how to comfort her master. Tong Tap Tan and his maid had long been a topic of gossip among the wealthy families of Fuck Lock Street and Dao Deep Alley. This was all thanks to Tong Tap Tan's cheap father, Governor Tong. The town had no prominent figures or significant events, so the imperial court had stationed a ceramic supervisor here. Among the more than 10 supervisors throughout history, Governor Tong was the most beloved. Unlike his predecessors, who distanced themselves from the common folk or buried themselves in scholarly studies, Governor Tong personally involved himself in the kiln's operations, working harder than even the craftsmen. Over more than 10 years, this originally refined and scholarly governor had tanned under the sun, his attire no different from that of a farmer. He never put on airs. Unfortunately, the imperial ceramics produced in the town failed to meet expectations. Whether in glaze color, craftsmanship, or structural design, they fell below standard. The veteran kiln masters could not understand why. Eventually, the court recalled Governor Tong to the capital, recognizing his diligence even if he had no achievements. Before leaving, he spent all his wealth to build a covered bridge. Later, people realized that when Governor Tong departed, he did not take a certain child with him. At that moment, several prominent families in town suddenly understood. It could be said that Governor Tong left behind an unusual bond with this small town. Moreover, the new ceramic supervisor took special care to ensure that Tong Tap Tan, now living in the town, had a life free of worries, enjoying both food and leisure. Now, his maid, newly renamed Tri Q, had an unknown past. He had no choice but to quietly gaze at the broad avenue stretching endlessly to the east, winding like a thick golden serpent. Out of habit, he picked up a handful of soil, clenched it in his palm, and slowly kneaded it. He once followed Old Man Jiu across the hills and rivers surrounding the small town, carrying a heavy luggage pack filled with tools like a wood-splitting knife and a hoe. Under the old man's guidance, they would stop at various places. Tran Benin had a peculiar habit of eating dirt. He would scoop up a handful of soil and put it directly into his mouth, savoring its texture and taste. Over time, he became so skilled that even by merely crushing soil between his fingers, he could determine its composition. Eventually, he even developed the ability to assess the origin of broken porcelain shards at the market. Simply weighing them in his hand was enough for him to identify which kiln they came from, or even which master had fired them. Although Old Man Jiu had a strange temperament, was unsociable, and often scolded Tran Benin, there was a time when he found the boy too dull and slow-witted. In his frustration, he abandoned him in the wild mountains and returned alone to the kiln. When the boy finally traversed 60 miles of mountainous terrain and approached the long kiln, it was already late at night. That day, heavy rain poured down relentlessly. Limping through the muddy road, the stubborn boy, who had always relied on himself to survive, felt the urge to cry for the first time when he saw the distant glimmer of light. Yet, he never resented the old man, nor did he hold any grudges. A poor boy without education, he still understood one simple truth: in this world, aside from one's parents, no one was obligated to be good to you. But his parents had left long ago. Tran Benin patiently waited in silence. The ragged man seemed to realize he wouldn't be able to trick his way out this time. He opened his eyes and laughed, saying, "Isn't it just 5 copper coins? A man being this stingy will never achieve greatness." Tran Benin looked helpless. "Aren't you the one making a fuss over it?" The man grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow, uneven teeth. Chuckling, he said, "That's why, if you don't want to end up like me, a penniless drifter, you should stop worrying about those 5 coins. Tran Benin sighed, lifted his head, and said seriously, "If you're really struggling, we can forget about the 5 coins. But let's be clear, from now on, every letter means 1 copper coin. No more running from debts." The scruffy man turned his head, still smiling. "Kid, with your rigid and stubborn nature, you're going to suffer in life. Ever heard the saying, a little loss is a blessing? If you can't even stomach small losses." He glanced at the soil in the boy's hand, paused briefly, and then sneered, "Then your fate is to always toil under the sky." Tran Benin retorted, "Didn't I just say I don't need the 5 coins? Isn't that accepting a small loss?" The man was momentarily at a loss for words. Annoyed, he waved his hand. "Scram, scram. Talking to you is exhausting." Tran Benin let the soil slip from his fingers and stood up. "The moisture in the roots of this tree is too heavy." The man raised his head and cursed with a grin, "You think I need your advice? Young men like you have so much energy, you could fry pancakes on your backs." As he watched the boy's retreating figure, the man smirked and muttered something under his breath, seemingly cursing the heavens. That day, Scholar Tay unexpectedly ended class early. Behind the private school was a courtyard with a small bamboo gate leading to a bamboo grove. Tong Tap Tan had been listening to a storyteller under an old locust tree when someone summoned him to play a game of Go. He was reluctant to go, but the person claimed it was Teacher Tae's wish, to see how much they had improved. Tong Tap Tan held deep respect and a slight fear for the reserved Teacher Tae, so he had no choice but to accept. However, he insisted on waiting until the storyteller finished before heading to the school's rear courtyard. The blue-robed messenger left ahead of time, reminding him not to be late. He nagged about how master values discipline and dislikes broken promises, repeating the same old lecture. Tong Tap Tan impatiently dug his finger into his ear and muttered, yeah, I got it. By the time Tong Tap Tan arrived at the back courtyard with his maidservant Tri Q, a cold wind was blowing. The refined blue-robed young scholar was already seated in the usual southern position, sitting straight and upright. Tong Tap Tan plopped down across from him, facing south from the northern seat. Teacher Tae sat to the west, silently observing the game. Whenever her young master played Go, Tri Q would take a walk in the bamboo grove to avoid disturbing the scholars. Today was no different. In this small town, where scholars were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns, the mere act of studying set one apart. Following the rules set by Teacher Tae, Tong Tap Tan and the blue-robed scholar drew lots to determine who would take the black stones and move first. The two had begun learning Go at almost the same time. However, while Tong Tap Tan was naturally talented and quickly became a skilled player, the blue-robed scholar progressed more slowly. Yet, as the apprentice of a prestigious tutor and a personal study companion, he had ample opportunities to observe and learn. Whenever Tong Tap Tan played, he always started by drawing white stones from the container, ensuring an odd or even count. His opponent would then draw one or two black stones, guessing the parity to determine who would go first. In the early years, no matter whether Tong Tap Tan played as black or white, he never lost a game. However, his interest in Go was fleeting, he played inconsistently. Meanwhile, the blue-robed scholar, though lacking talent, had the advantage of constant exposure. Despite being just a student at the academy, he spent most of his time by Teacher Tae's side. Even as a mere observer. In the alley of Han Hoa, there is a well with water, known as the Iron Lock Well. A rough iron chain, as thick as a young man's arm, hangs down year after year into the depths of the well. Whenever there is water in the well, the iron lock is present as well. Who placed it there, and for what reason? This has long since become an unsolvable mystery. Even the oldest elders in the small town cannot explain its origins, nor do they remember when it first appeared. Legend has it that there was once a knowledgeable man in town who attempted to test how long the chain truly was. Ignoring the elders' warnings about the old saying, "For every foot of chain you pull out, you lose a year of life," he paid no heed to the superstition. He pulled with all his strength for the duration of an incense stick, retrieving a massive pile of iron chains, yet still unable to see the end. Exhausted, he left the heap of chains coiled beside the well's wheel and declared that he would return the next day to continue. He refused to believe in such superstitions. However, that very night, upon returning home, he bled from all 7 orifices and died suddenly in his bed, his eyes wide open, refusing to close. No matter how his family tried to lay him to rest, his body remained rigid. In the end, an old man who had lived near the well for generations instructed the family to bring the corpse to the well and watch as he returned the chains into the water. Only when the last link of iron sank back into the depths did the corpse finally close its eyes. A young child and an old man slowly approached the iron lock well. The child, a little boy with a constantly running nose, had just finished telling this tale with a clarity and detail far beyond his tender age. His large, black grape-like eyes gleamed as he sniffled, pulling back the 2 streams of snot. Looking at the old storyteller holding a large white bowl, he pursed his lips and demanded, "I've finished my story. Now let me see what you've got in your bowl." The old man chuckled. "Patience, patience. Let's sit by the well first, then I'll show you something good." The boy, with an impish grin, threatened, "Don't go back on your word, or you won't die a peaceful death. If you change your mind once we reach the well, you'll fall right in, and I won't fish your corpse out. And if lightning strikes you into a pile of charcoal, I'll take a rock and smash you to bits." Hearing this string of ominous words, spoken without hesitation, the old man felt a headache coming on. He quickly asked, "Where did you learn to talk like that?" The child answered decisively, "From my mother." The old man sighed. No wonder. Truly, this town breeds talent. The child suddenly stopped walking, furrowing his brow. "You're insulting me, aren't you? I know some people like to say nice things in a backwards way, like song tap tan." The old man hastily denied it and changed the subject. "Tell me, does this town often experience strange happenings?" The boy nodded vigorously. The old man urged, "Tell me about one." The child pointed at him and replied matter-of-factly, "Like you, carrying around a big white bowl but refusing to toss in a single coin. My mother said you tell stories well, but listening to you is like being lost in the fog, clearly a scam artist. That's why she made me give you some money, but you refused. So what's really inside that bowl?" The old man was both amused and exasperated. It turned out that after finishing his storytelling session under the old pagoda tree, the boy had led the old man to Han Hoa Alley to see the infamous well. At first, the child was reluctant, but the old man teased him, claiming that his large white bowl held a mysterious and rare treasure. The boy, ever curious, took the bait. Even when the old man set a bizarre challenge, asking the child to try lifting him up to see if he weighed more than 40 Jian, the boy didn't hesitate to agree. After all, lifting someone a few times wouldn't hurt. But no matter how hard he tried, using both hands and all his strength, he couldn't budge the old man. Skeptical, the boy cast a sideways glance at the old man's thin limbs and shook his head. He thought to himself, even that poor kid Tran Bintan has more strength than this old fellow. But he held his tongue, determined not to let his impatience show. Finally, they reached the well. The old man did not sit on the edge. The well was made of dark green bricks, its history deeply rooted in time. Unseen forces made the old man's breathing grow heavy. The boy, however, was fearless. He hopped up onto the well's edge, sitting with his legs dangling over the dark abyss. The sight made the old man break out in a cold sweat. If the boy lost his balance, recovering his body from the ancient depths would be nearly impossible. The old man stepped forward cautiously and narrowed his eyes, carefully examining the iron chain locked at the bottom of the well's pulley. Such a wellspring of power, yet belonging to a single town, he murmured, scanning his surroundings. His mind was filled with countless thoughts. In the end, where will this power fall? He stretched out his free left hand, gazing at his palm. His palm lines were intricate and weathered. A new mark had begun to form, stretching slowly, like cracks forming on fine porcelain. To those who understand, reading a palm is like reading the landscape. Yet, at this moment, the old man was only reading his own fate. He furrowed his brows, startled. In just half a day, my condition has worsened this much. What about the others? Meanwhile, the child, still sitting on the well's edge, placed his hands on his hips and pointed at the old man. Are you gonna show me the bowl or not? The old man sighed. Get down from there first, and I'll show you. The boy hesitated but eventually hopped off. The old man deliberated for a moment, then, with a solemn expression, said, Little one, we are fated to meet, so I will let you see the secret of this bowl. But once you see it, you must never tell anyone, not even your mother. If you promise, I will show you. But if you break this vow, even if I'm cursed for eternity, I won't let you have another glimpse. The boy blinked. Go on, then. The old man stepped forward, positioned himself at the edge of the well, and tilted the white bowl ever so slightly. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The boy waited, growing impatient. Then, without a sound, a stream of water poured from the bowl into the depths of the well. The boy prepared to mock the old man. But suddenly, he fell silent. His expression shifted from shock to confusion, then to fear. Without another word, he leaped away from the well and bolted home. For the bowl had never emptied. Water had continuously poured from it, yet the bowl remained full. The boy felt he had seen something impossible in broad daylight. This is just the beginning of a much larger tale, woven from legends, mysteries, and the hidden forces shaping the fate of a small town. As soon as Chen Pingyan returned to the backyard, his eyelids started twitching, his left eye signaling fortune, while his right eye foretold misfortune. So, he sat down on the doorstep and began his habit of spinning clay, his hands suspended in midair. Soon, the straw-shoe-wearing boy entered a trance-like state. His diligence was one thing, but more importantly, this act helped him suppress hunger. Over time, he had developed a habit. Whenever something troubled him, he would spin clay. Pottery making is heavily dependent on fate. Before firing, no one can predict whether the glaze and shape of a ceramic piece will turn out as desired. It all depends on destiny. However, before firing, the spinning of clay is crucial. Unfortunately, Master Yao had always deemed Chen Pingyan untalented, allowing him only to perform menial labor like kneading clay. Since he wasn't formally taught, Chen Pingyan carefully observed others and practiced secretly, searching for the right touch. The sound of a bamboo gate creaking open echoed from the neighboring courtyard. It was Song Tap Tan, returning from the town school with his maidservant Ji Kuei. The handsome youth swiftly leapt onto the low wall, crouching down as he spread open his palm. In it were several thumb-sized stones, varied in color, oily green, white like lotus roots, and translucent. These unremarkable pebbles could be found anywhere along the town stream, but among them was a particular blood-red stone, highly prized. The school's teacher, Master Qi, had even carved a seal for a student named Zhao Yao using one such stone. Song Tap Tan had long admired it and had tried several times to trade something for it, but Zhao Yao stubbornly refused. Song Tap Tan tossed a stone at Chen Pingyan, not too forcefully, hitting him in the chest. The latter remained unmoved. He threw another, this time hitting Chen Pingyan on the forehead. Still, the boy didn't react. Song Tap Tan was used to this indifference. With a few more casual tosses, 7 or 8 stones bounced off in various directions. Although he wanted to distract Chen Pingyan and break his concentration, he was careful not to aim for his arms or fingers. He considered that an unfair way to win. After exhausting his stones, Song Tap Tan clapped the dust off his hands. Chen Pingyan exhaled slowly, shaking his wrists but never sparing Song Tap Tan a glance. Instead, he lowered his head, forming a knife hand with the fingers of his left hand. This was a technique known as jumping knife among the town's ceramic artisans. It wasn't exclusive to any one master, but Old Yao's technique was considered unmatched. Whenever he demonstrated it, everyone would give him a thumbs up. Old Yao had taken in several apprentices over the years, yet none had ever truly satisfied him. It wasn't until Lu Tiandong came along that he believed he had found someone to pass down his craft to. Back when Lu Tiandong practiced, Chen Pingyan would always squat nearby, watching intently whenever he had the chance. Lu Tiandong was extremely prideful but trusted Chen Pingyan to keep secrets. So, he would often spout Master Yao's cryptic teachings to intimidate the younger boy, things like, if you want your knife to carve smoothly, your hands must not be rigid. In the end, it all comes down to a stable heart. But when Chen Pingyan pressed him on what exactly a stable heart meant, Lu Tiandong would falter. Song Tap Tan watched for a while but soon grew bored. He leapt down from the wall and entered his house. His maid, Ji Kuei, remained standing by the wall. If she didn't stand on her toes, only the upper half of her face would be visible over the top. Even so, it was clear she was already growing into a beauty. She thought for a moment, then stood on tiptoe, scanning the area around the poor boy before finally spotting 2 heart-shaped stones on the ground, one bright red, the other a smooth milky white. They were stones her young master had just discarded. Hesitating for a moment, she lowered her voice and shyly asked, "Chen Pingyun, could you pick up those 2 stones for me? I really like them." Chen Pingyun slowly raised his head, his hands never pausing. His eyes signaled for her to wait a moment. Ji Kuei smiled, her expression like the first sprout of green after spring rain, delicate and fresh. But the boy had already lowered his head again, missing the touching scene. The corners of her lips curled up, and her bright eyes shimmered as if something tiny and alive swam within them. When Chen Pingyun finally finished his work and asked which stones she meant, Ji Kuei's gaze returned to its usual soft and gentle demeanor, like spring mud after rain. Following her directions, he picked up the stones, walked to the wall, and placed them on top before she could even reach out her hand. She grasped them tightly in her palm. For those who deliberately seek treasures, it's like searching for a needle in the ocean. 10 years might pass without finding one. But for those with fate on their side, even without searching, treasures seem to fall into their lap. Chen Pingyun smiled and teased, "Aren't you afraid the snail boy will show up at your doorstep and scold you for half a day?" She neither admitted nor denied that her young master had stolen from someone else, she simply smiled in silence. In the muddy alley of the town, there was a mother and son known for their unmatched skill in verbal combat. No one could out-argue them, except for Song Tap Tan. The child in question was particularly troublesome, always sporting a runny nose and spending his days catching fish, collecting stones, and storing them in a large clay vat. Song Tap Tan loved to provoke him, periodically stealing a few stones. A day or 2 might pass unnoticed, but sooner or later, the boy would realize his treasures were missing and explode in rage, cursing outside Song Tap Tan's house for hours. Even his mother wouldn't intervene. Instead, she would egg him on, purposely choosing embarrassing stories about Song Tap Tan's late father to retell loudly. Many times, this would drive Song Tap Tan into a fury, nearly making him grab a bench to settle the matter with his fists. Only Ji Kuei's persuasion could calm him down. One day, as the town's sun began to set, Chen Pingyun found himself drawn into a strange encounter that would change the course of his fate forever. A man and a woman stepped into muddy alley. The young man wore a high crown and carried a jade pendant on his waist. Compared to the wealthiest heirs of the Liu family in town, he looked even more like a noble and refined gentleman. The woman's age was hard to determine at a glance. At first, she appeared to be a young maiden, her skin dewy and fresh, her pointed chin as delicate as an icicle hanging from the eaves in winter. But upon closer inspection, she carried the charm of a 30-year-old woman, her single-lidded eyes seductive, her figure curvaceous. From head to toe, she exuded a natural allure, her every step carrying a rhythm of grace unfamiliar to the women of this humble town. She curiously surveyed her surroundings, even reaching out to touch the reddish walls. Finding that no traces were left behind, she asked in wonder, "Fu Nam Hoa, is this really the hidden blessed land you spoke of? Why is it that in the geomantic map drawn by my family's ancestor, this alley wasn't marked as important?" The young man avoided answering directly. Instead, he asked with a playful smirk, "If we really do stumble upon an unexpected fortune here, how do you plan to repay me?" The woman tilted her body slightly, lacing her fingers behind her back, emphasizing her full bosom. She smiled coquettishly and said half-jokingly, "However you like." Fu Nam Hoa hadn't expected such a blunt response, and for a moment, he was at a loss. But given that they were here for an important venture, concerning the prosperity of their entire families for 100, perhaps even 1,000, years, he dared not entertain any fleeting indulgences, especially not in broad daylight, within this town filled with prying eyes. So, he quickly changed the subject, pointing deeper into the alley. Smiling, he said, "Fairy Tai, business is business. Friendship is friendship. I must reiterate our agreement, this muddy alley has 2 households, one with a master and servant, the other with a mother and son. I get first pick on whom to bet on. As collateral, your Yunhe Mountain will provide us with 10 blocks of your specialty, cloud root stone, every year. The woman nodded with an enchanting smile. Of course. Fu Nam Hoa continued walking leisurely as he spoke. Next, if you acquire the opportunity your family desires here, the object in question must be examined by our respective ancestors to determine a fair price. Once a value is set, your Yunhe Mountain will pay half in cloud root stones. As for the golden bamboo slips, do you have any objections? Or do you have doubts about whether, after sealing this agreement, you will be able to gain tangible benefits and return with a full purse, convincing your Yunhe Mountain elders to approve of this gamble? The woman's flirtatious expression vanished, replaced by one of solemn determination. She no longer seemed like a courtesan lost in a haze of wine and song, but rather a regal empress commanding a kingdom. This woman, known as Tai Jin Jian of Yunhe Mountain, declared firmly, agreed. Fu Nam Hoa narrowed his eyes, his expression darkening. He stopped walking and looked directly into the eyes of the woman, who stood as tall as he did. Let's be clear, our alliance today isn't because of some miraculous connection or shared ideals. It's simply because the elders of our families, Lao Long City and Yunhe Mountain, have cultivated goodwill for centuries. If we mess this up and provoke their wrath, it won't just be you and me who suffer, but even our parents and teachers won't be able to bear the consequences. Tai Jin Jian chuckled. So while we're in this town, we must be honest with each other and work together sincerely, correct? Fu Nam Hoa, standing in the dim alley, still radiated the charm of a nobleman. He smiled. Besides that, he glanced behind them briefly, then lowered his voice. We must also be wary of those two. They are not from Xinjiang Mountain, nor do they belong to any renowned righteous sect. Furthermore, from what I've heard, those two are notorious for using unorthodox methods and have little regard for rules. The tall, slender woman squinted her phoenix-like eyes, her tone laced with playful sarcasm. So, is that why you chose me, noble Fu? Fu Nam Hoa whispered, let's move. Though this place is watched over by sages, keeping the balance of power in check, it's still best to be cautious. If we slip up and fail here, it'll be a disaster. This is our one chance to leap over the Dragon Gate. He reaffirmed his conviction, silently chanting to himself, the Tao may be unpredictable, but nothing will block my path. Even gods and immortals shall fall before me. Looking deeper into the alley, he saw a slender young man approaching. Their second encounter. The two continued walking gracefully, appearing like an immortal couple wandering through the mortal world. The tall, slender woman noticed the young man as well. She teased, twice now, we've crossed paths in this little alley. Tell me, do you think this boy could be? She left her sentence unfinished, but Fu Nam Hoa knew what she meant. He chuckled. Tai Ferry, the town has 600 households, plus nearly 5,000 servants and workers raised by the 10 major families. This town may hide dragons and crouching tigers, but over the years, any true prodigies have long since been secretly divided up. The reason we even have a shot at picking up a treasure now is simply because the truly powerful figures are deliberately leaving gaps in the net. Tai Jin Jian laughed at herself, feeling a bit embarrassed by her own naive thought. After a brief hesitation, she said, my father once told me, when you enter this town, if someone makes you feel uneasy, you should instinctively avoid them, never provoke them. This place is full of hidden powers, impossible to measure. Those who give you a bad feeling are likely your competitors in this grand treasure hunt. She smirked. As for those who make you feel drawn to them, well, they are likely people with deep blessings in this land. If luck is on our side, we might be able to turn them into allies or even claim their fortune for ourselves. Her smile grew more pronounced. Of course, as long as we don't kill anyone outright and don't break those unshakable old rules, anything goes. Be it buying, deceiving, or outright stealing, it all depends on. Tai Jin Jian's lips curled. Our mood. She suddenly furrowed her brows. Fu Nam Hua, why didn't you let me bring along a local descendant of the Zhao clan? I did learn a bit of their dialect before coming here. Fu Nam Hua interrupted, shaking his head. The major clans here have secret connections with the outside world. They've spent generations transmitting select information under the noses of the sages without crossing the line. Their deep foundations set them apart from us. And borrowing their people's power? It's just an unnecessary risk. It's better if we handle things ourselves. She smiled. Fine. If talking gets tedious, I'll leave it to you. Fu Nam Hua simply smiled. Tai Jin Jian said no more. After all, allies formed midway through a journey were never as trustworthy as true kin. And to those whose ambition was to achieve enlightenment through the Tao, family bonds, whether between father and son, husband and wife, or siblings, meant nothing. Fu Nam Hua, with his polished charm, seemed the very picture of an esteemed noble. Yet, as soon as he stepped into this town, he had already decided, if necessary, he would kill Tai Jin Jian himself. He reached down, lightly gripping the jade pendant at his waist. The old dragon spins its web, crafting destiny with skillful hands. A gentleman does not part from his jade. Tai Jin Jian mused for a moment before saying, between Song Tap Tan and Ko San. I choose Ko San. Fu Nam Hua raised an eyebrow. Very well. It's decided. And so, fate began to weave its unseen threads. At the moment Tai Jin Jian stepped backward, she already realized something was wrong. A situation far worse than merely stepping on dog feces, of course, was stepping in it, realizing it, and knowing that someone else had witnessed it. Even more humiliating was having that person pointed out aloud. Tai Jin Jian was not a woman of shallow temperament, nor was she a delicate young lady unaccustomed to hardship. As one of many descendants of the Yunhe Mountain sect master, securing a coveted spot in this endeavor was proof enough of her capability. Yunhe Mountain comprised 18 peaks, shrouded in mist year-round, rich in cloud-root stones, an essential material for Taoist alchemical pills, renowned for its purity and flawlessness. Naturally, Yunhe Mountain's disciples valued cleanliness and elegance. Tai Jin Jian was no exception. If not for the immense stakes tied to this small town, she would never have set foot here in her lifetime, let alone walk through the filth-ridden muddy alley, littered with chicken droppings and dog feces. The most embarrassing part? Upon arriving, those of them who had once stood high above the mortal realm suddenly found themselves stripped of everything they relied on. The powers they wielded, their dominion over blessed lands, their ability to move mountains, summon winds, wield artifacts, and subdue demons, had all been rendered useless. Then came this humiliating moment. At first, Fu Nam Hua found it amusing, who would believe that the lofty Yunhe Mountain fairy had stepped right into dog filth. But his amusement vanished when he suddenly shouted, Tai Jin Jian, stop. From his vantage point on the courtyard wall, Song Tap Tan's pupils contracted, his grip tightening around the carved jade pendant in his palm. In the alley, Tai Jin Jian had, in a single step, closed the distance to stand directly before Chen Pingyan. Her flawless, delicate hand struck toward the straw-shoe-wearing boy's head. But just as Fu Nam Hua's voice rang out to stop her, her hand suddenly halted midair. Instead of striking, she gently raised it again, landing with a light pat, an action more akin to a senior showing affectionate guidance to a junior. Bending down, she locked eyes with the boy. His gaze was like a crystal-clear spring, so pure she could see her own reflection. Unfortunately, her mood plummeted in an instant. She forced a smile and said, "Little one, I can tell you deliberately slow your speech when you talk." Fu Nam Hua let out a breath of relief. Had Tai Jin Jian truly dared to kill someone outright here, she would likely have been expelled from the town, dragging Yunhe Mountain's reputation through the mud. His expression darkened, and he spoke in refined courtly dialect, "Tai Jin Jian, think carefully before you act. If you continue being this reckless, I may need to reconsider our alliance. I have no interest in letting you ruin everything we've built. With her back turned to the young master of Lao Long City, Tai Jin Jian whispered to herself in a quick murmur, the superior sees the Buddha swiftly, the inferior sees the Buddha late. If there truly is a pure land, if there truly is a lotus pond. She quickly turned back around, flashing Fu Nam Hua an apologetic smile. I lost my composure. I promise this won't happen again. Fu Nam Hua sneered. Are you sure? Tai Jin Jian let the matter pass without further words, once again lowering her gaze to the strawshoe-wearing boy. She spoke now in the refined language of the central provinces. Yunhe Mountain has long been aligned with the Buddhist 5 sects. We place great importance on subduing the monkey mind and restraining the wild horse of the will. Yet until today, I never truly grasped what those terms meant. My elders never rushed to explain it to me either, leaving me to figure it out on my own. But who would have thought that stepping in a pile of dog shit in Muddy Alley would give me my first true insight? Chen Pingyan remarked plainly, Sister, since you've already stepped in dog shit in broad daylight, why not hurry up and wipe it off? The fairy-like woman, who had just moments ago felt she had entered a state of enlightenment, immediately snapped out of it. Her face turned dark green. But with Fu Nam Hua's warning still echoing in her ears, she could only vent her frustration by jabbing a finger hard against Chen Pingyan's forehead. Glaring, she snapped, so young, yet no one has taught you manners. A sharp tongue leads to an early death, and a bitter heart repels fortune. Chen Pingyan, thick-skinned as ever, paid no mind. He merely turned his gaze toward Song Taptan, saying nothing. Song Taptan clicked his tongue and scolded, Chen Pingyan, why are you looking at me? What bad luck. Fu Nam Hua, observing this from the side, noted something peculiar. He hadn't even stepped into Song Taptan's courtyard, yet the youth's expression was already sour. Fu Nam Hua smirked and mocked, Tai Jin Jian. Imagine that, someone willing to stall their path to immortality over a pile of dog shit. Tai Jin Jian didn't retort. Instead, she simply gave the scrawny, unremarkable-looking boy a deep, lingering glance before turning and walking away. Just then, a soft voice behind her murmured, Sister, your eyelashes are very long. A filthy, insignificant insect of the mortal world. Dared to flirt with an immortal fairy? Tai Jin Jian turned back in a fury. She had made up her mind, no matter if it cost her some luck, she would teach this cunning street rat a lesson. True, within this town, their powers were restrained, as if they had been imprisoned, unable to wield their Taoist techniques. But their years of cultivation had not gone to waste. Even without their powers, their honed physical abilities remained intact, especially in movements akin to martial training. A single palm strike to a key acupoint would be enough to plant a disease in this boy, robbing him of years of his lifespan. Yet, as she faced him in the dim alleyway, all she saw was a tanned, dark-skinned face and a pair of bright, unwavering eyes. Like a full moon rising over the sea. At first, Tai Jin Jian's eyes lit up. Then, something in her, a woman's innate compassion, surfaced. But almost immediately, that fleeting sentiment vanished. Instead, she smiled brilliantly, a look of realization dawning upon her. Slaying demons and overcoming tribulations, this was an opportunity. In Yunhe Mountain, it had long been a tenet that every fated encounter, every cycle of karma, was its own trial of enlightenment. And so, once again, she raised a hand and pressed it against the boy's chest, applying a subtle force. The movement was fluid, swift as lightning. Even though the boy instinctively tried to step back, he could not evade her touch. Fu Nam Hua observed this, his gaze fixated on the graceful yet sinister figure before him. But instead of feeling captivated, his heart burned with a chilling sense of dread. Suppressing his killing intent, he feigned outrage and shouted, "You've already cursed him once, why again? Tai Jin Jian, have you lost your mind? Are you really willing to throw away an opportunity for immortality over some street rat?" Tai Jin Jian ignored him. Fu Nam Hua lowered his voice, resuming his composed demeanor. Smiling wryly, he remarked, "The great Tai Jian, fussing over a mere street boy. If word spread, wouldn't it be embarrassing?" Tai Jian turned away, laughing. "This alley truly has fate with me. Who knew I'd stumble upon yet another small fortune? A minor one, but a fortune nonetheless. A good omen. I'm now even more certain that Ko-san is the right choice." Fu Namhua was momentarily startled. Could she truly have had a moment of enlightenment? Tai Jian lifted her soiled foot, smirking at the mess on her shoe. Talk about stepping in good fortune. From a distance, Song Tap-Tan watched, his expression dark and unreadable. No one noticed the maid, Ji Kue, standing motionless. In that fleeting moment, her pupils gleamed with a faint golden hue before vanishing. Fu Namhua sensed a vague discomfort but found no source for it. He dismissed the feeling, assuming it was the gaze of an unseen sage monitoring their actions. Meanwhile, Chen Pingyan calmly asked, "Did you do something to me?" Tai Jian didn't turn around. "Little one, you're overthinking it." Chen Pingyan fell silent. Tai Jian turned back, grinning. "You'll be dead in half a year." Chen Pingyan blinked. She giggled. "You actually believe that? Silly boy." He smirked. To them, he was just another ant underfoot. But he didn't mind.